The way the Russians are restoring things here, honestly, it might have been better not to restore anything at all. It's cold. Today, we're going to look at the two largest towns on Svalbard, Longyearbyen and Barentsburg. Longyearbyen is Norwegian and Barentsburg is Russian. The comparison isn't exactly fair. Russian town is much smaller, and technically it's on Norwegian territory. There are restrictions. Russia manages it, but it's still Norway, so Russia doesn't have full authority there. Still, I think it's interesting to see what the northernmost towns of Russia and Norway actually look like. First, let's clarify what Svalbard is. Up until 1920, it was basically no man's land. Then in 1920, an agreement was signed, and Svalbard came under Norwegian control. But it's not that simple. Multiple countries signed a treaty that allowed any country with permanent economic activity here to maintain a presence. And what counts as permanent activity was clearly defined, for example, coal mining. As a result, only two countries are here today: Norway, which has jurisdiction over the entire archipelago, and Russia, which mines coal here. Svalbard is one of the least populated places on Earth. It has one of the highest percentages of untouched wilderness in Europe. People really value the nature here. That's exactly why tourists come. And yes, there are polar bears. Polar bears can kill you. That's bad for two reasons. First, nobody wants to be killed by a polar bear. Second, you're not allowed to die on Svalbard. And if, God forbid, a polar bear gets you, your family will have a lot of problems because your body has to be flown back to the mainland. There are no burials here, so it's best not to run into a bear. Because of the permafrost, bodies don't decompose. They can be dug up, for example, by polar bears or other predators. If someone has a terminal illness, they're sent to the mainland. If there's a serious accident, same thing. So friends, if you decide to die, you'll be sent to Norway. And to avoid getting eaten, everyone here carries a gun. Yes, you're not allowed to leave the settlement without one. That's why it's completely normal to see a sign in a bar or a shop saying, "Please leave your weapon with the cashier."
They sometimes actually come close to town. Last time was about 1.5 months ago. They came, tried to scare him away with flares. This time it didn't really work, so they ended up just taking the helicopter and chasing him away with the helicopter.
There are more polar bears here than people. About 4,000 polar bears for just 3,000 people. At the airport, there's a stuffed polar bear sitting right on the baggage carousel. Polar bears are everywhere. It's basically there to remind visitors to behave. So according to the latest figures, Longyearbyen has 2,258 residents. Barentsburg, including the settlement of Pyramiden, has 458. Longyearbyen has a mayor, Barentsburg doesn't. And it can't because of its special status. It's Norwegian territory, but it's managed by Russia. The two settlements are about 40 kilometers apart, so the climate is roughly the same. Both towns were founded in the early 20th century by coal mining companies. Today, almost everything in Barentsburg, including housing and tourist facilities, belongs to the Russian company Arktikugol. So what we're really comparing here is Norway versus Arktikugol. There are no roads on Svalbard. Well, technically there are inside the two towns, but there's no road between them, none at all. In summer, you get around by boat. That's the main form of transport. In winter, it's snowmobiles. That's why there are so many of them, and people visit each other by snowmobile. There are also tons of cars. I honestly don't know where they're driving. If you live in Longyearbyen, tell me, why do you need so many cars? Where are you going? There are no roads here. My guess, they just miss city life. Anyway, we need a car. We're going to the supermarket. Russia's presence on Svalbard goes back more than 500 years. According to various sources, Pomors first reached Svalbard at the turn of the 16th and 17th centuries. They didn't just come in summer to hunt, what they called fish teeth, walrus tusk. They harvested walrus ivory, and they also stayed through the winter. Even today, archaeologists keep finding traces of Pomor settlements here. So the Pomors were here long before the Dutch. The Dutch arrived only about 100 years later. And now, let's take a look at how people live in Barentsburg and how they live in Longyearbyen.
These are the so-called Finnish wooden houses, 4 identical designs. They were the first Soviet homes built after the war. When people returned here in 1946, Barentsburg started rebuilding with these houses.
Barentsburg has several residential buildings, standard Soviet 4-story panel block. Just the usual dull prefab buildings, classic Khrushchev-era stuff. Honestly, it's amazing how these awful standard designs, no matter where you go, even at the edge of the Arctic, the Soviet Union shows up. And of course, it brings housing with it. Why build these miserable concrete boxes? Couldn't you have built something better? Recently, they decided to modernize them, so now the buildings are even uglier. They've been wrapped in cheap, colorful Chinese facades, and this is what we ended up with.
As bright as possible. Why? Because the polar night is long. That's one reason. You always need some color here. It lifts your mood. And when everything around you is just white, 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 you need visual landmarks. Even in a snowstorm, they can save you.
I like the church. It's wooden, unpainted. Even when it looks a bit rough, that's a good thing. There's none of that shiny new stuff. The wooden stairs are bare, weathered, gray with age. And there are these old, half-collapsed houses that nobody really takes care of. Honestly, that might be the most beautiful thing in Barentsburg. This building here used to be the mine director's house. Now it's abandoned. They recently replaced the roof on this historic wooden building, and they slapped on that metal roofing we all hate. Poor house. Since we're technically in Norway, all of this is managed by the Norwegians. They say every change has to be approved by them. And I look around at this historic area. It's rotting, falling apart. And I honestly don't know if that's good or bad. Because judging by how Arctic Eagle restores things here, it might have been better if they hadn't restored anything at all. What really stands out is how run down everything is. Crooked concrete slabs, broken roads. Even here, at the edge of the world, the roads are falling apart. You look at these buildings and they're faded, battered, collapsing, abandoned. And this so-called seafront of Barentsburg? Awful, just awful. Creepy, ugly, embarrassing. It's hard to understand why it's like this. In Norway, buildings are designed by architects. Imagine that, architects design buildings. For example, this is the Svalbard Science Center, designed by an architectural firm from Oslo. Today it houses a university and an excellent museum. When it was built, they even used 3D modeling to check whether snowdrifts would block doors and windows. In Longyearbyen, everything is completely different. There's a huge variety of architecture. You could probably write a whole book on modern northern architecture just based on Longyearbyen alone. So many interesting solutions. Many of these buildings deserve their own separate story. The architectural diversity here is genuinely impressive. What really bothered me in Barentsburg was the color choices. Now look at Longyearbyen. Here's the key difference. All the roofs are black. They use soft, dark roofing, so roofs are black. And that alone creates a completely different architectural feel. It looks great. Black houses, black roofs, it works. Everything feels neat, intentional, well thought out. The town has a totally different vibe. Norwegians don't deny themselves the pleasure of stepping out onto the balcony, even in winter. That's why balconies here aren't enclosed. Skis, 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 they're everywhere. And here's a power socket and cable for warming up the engine. A classic northern detail? If you've ever been to Finland, you've seen the same thing, parking lots with special outlets for engine heaters. Downspouts. Even here, everything goes straight into the storm drains. Nothing just pours onto the ground. See? Everything's tidy. All routed underground. And here's the entrance. Firewood, antlers, and engine skis lying right there, and nobody hides anything. Sometimes people don't even lock their cars here. They'll just leave the keys inside. That brick color you see, it's a traditional Norwegian color. They've used it for centuries. Originally, the paint was even tinted with whale blood. The idea was to make wooden houses look like brick from a distance. Brick houses were for the wealthy. If you couldn't afford real brick, you painted your house to look like one, so it looked rich from afar. By the way, notice something else. Unlike Barentsburg, there are no sidewalks here. People walk along the edge of the road. I didn't see a single sidewalk. There is a pedestrian street, but no sidewalks.
This is Milk Street. Why is it called the Milky Way Street? Because that greenhouse there, that's the milkman's house. It's one of the few that survived from before the war. A bit to the left is another house. It's the only one taller than the governor's residence on Svalbard. And the owner was the last person to buy a house with land back in 1993.
Can you not buy land now?
You can buy a house, but not the land. He was the last one to get both.
Even their pumping stations and transformer buildings look good. And notice this, the pumping station is transparent. Anyone can walk up and look inside. They turned a purely technical building into a small landmark. I've seen people come up, peer inside, and go, wow, that's actually really cool. Now let's go back to Russia. Because of the permafrost, buildings here are raised on stilts. The entrances are high off the ground, so you have to climb long staircases just to get inside. The entrances here are marked with poles and little beacons, probably so you can find the door when there's snow, a blizzard, and everything's buried under snow. I've never seen that in Norway. Norwegians try to avoid stairs altogether. Instead, they raise the streets up to first floor level. And in front of the entrances, they use metal grates like this, so you don't have to shovel snow. Snow falls through the grates, off your boots, straight down. No cleaning needed, and it looks great. When you're walking around Longyearbyen, you don't even feel that the buildings are on stilts. It just feels like a normal northern town. It's really well done. These are newer buildings. They're on a steep slope, so using the ground floors for parking makes total sense. And for technical spaces, too. But look at the architecture again, how clean and thoughtful it is. This is a local high-rise. But because everything is finished in wood, natural materials, it feels warm and human. Before you enter the residential street, there's this small structure with mailboxes. It's raised as well, so the mailboxes don't get buried in snow. They're all grouped together in this little hut. There's a trash bin here. You can reach the playground by wooden walkways. And there's a designated grill area. This is what it looks like. Dry firewood is stacked here. Everything is properly set up. There's a shovel, a grill, a table, chairs, all made of wood. Untreated wood, it smells amazing. Again, they've used natural materials. Note the attention to detail, the quality of the work. You can immediately tell this is Norway just from the small things. The drainage, the joints, even something as simple as the railings. Here the posts are round, over here they're square. This isn't random mesh or some cheap junk. Everything is welded, finished, thought through. Here's a barbecue grill. People actually cook here. Here's one grill. And this is what the cooking area looks like. Now let's look at where ships arrive. This is where people coming to Barentsburg, tourists, first set foot. What do they see? A completely wrecked square. Everything is sunken, broken, dirty. There's an old office building, the port office. That's no longer in use. Right away you see these penguin trash bins. Everything feels sad and worn out. And there's a wrought iron bench. It's a mix of totally incompatible elements. And it instantly tells you this is definitely not Norway, because in Norway people have a slightly better sense of taste. This is the center of Barentsburg. Cracked concrete slabs, some weird, cheerful-looking benches. And of course, the ultra-shabby, outdated landscaping, you can't avoid it. Otherwise, you might forget you're in Russia. A truly awful flower bed, broken streetlights, they don't work anymore. All smashed, destroyed. And this is what the town center looks like now. Maybe something was planted here back in Soviet times. This is traditional architecture from 1958. Well, relatively traditional. And you have to admit, this building looks 100 times better. Wooden cladding, decorative window frames. It all feels warm and human. On the Russian side, they do have separate waste collection too. Household waste, food waste, and even batteries. And light bulbs, everything, ends up here. Trash is sorted everywhere here. The difference from Barentsburg is that there are permanent containers, and here's the kind a truck comes and empties directly. Here you got glass, paper, metal. And by the way, both Norway and Russia have an interesting road sign, warning that a polar bear might cross the road. On the Russian side, there's exactly one such sign, and it's a very strange one. First of all, the bear on it is taken straight from the United Russia Party logo. They didn't overthink it. We need a bear? Fine, let's just take the one from the logo and turn it into a road sign. They say there used to be two of these signs in the Russian part. But one of them was eaten by a polar bear. So now there's only one left. Which means that in all of Russia, there's just a single road sign warning that a polar bear might cross the road. The Norwegians have a similar sign too, but their bear is on a black background. And it's not stolen from a political logo. And by the way, look how much better black and red work together than red and white. In terms of color, the Norwegian sign looks far more refined. And this is actually an important point. When you look at a Norwegian town, it's just pleasant to the eye. When you look at Barentsburg, there are colors too, blue, red, something else. But something feels off. It's not very comfortable to look at. And the problem is white. White ruins the whole picture. The Norwegians removed white from their buildings. The snow is already white. There's no need for white houses. If we're talking about northern architecture, use gray. Add red, green, that's fine. Dark gray works perfectly. But don't use white. White instantly cheapens the look. Another thing worth mentioning, Svalbard is very expensive. Food is pricey because almost everything has to be shipped in. From the mainland, most likely from Norway. Norway is expensive as it is. Add shipping costs, add tourism. And everything becomes very expensive, even in the Russian part. So what about shops? Longyearbyen has one large supermarket, and Barentsburg has one small shop. On the Norwegian side, the selection is obviously much better. It's a huge supermarket with absolutely everything. And interestingly, they accept Norwegian kroner, euros, and US dollars. So, what about alcohol here?
It's pretty simple. The management of the Norwegian mines realized that people here drink a lot, because apart from the mine, there's basically nothing else to do. So back in the early 20th century, in the 1920s, they introduced a rule no more than 2 liters of strong alcohol.
So you can't buy more than 2 liters a month. What about Barentsburg?
Same thing in Barentsburg, but our limit is 1 liter.
Was that restriction introduced by the Russians?
Yes.
So how do they control it?
All local residents get special coupons. Alcohol is sold strictly using those coupons.
You can't buy alcohol without it?
Yes, it's the same in Longyearbyen.
So you can't get alcohol without a coupon?
Exactly. And visitors, people who fly in, can buy alcohol using their boarding pass. With a boarding pass, you're allowed 2 liters of strong alcohol, 24 cans of beer, and wine has no limit.
So you can drink as much wine as you want?
That's how it is. According to legend, it goes back to when the rules were first introduced. The mine managers were white-collar guys. They drank wine, but not spirits. So wine was left unrestricted. There was a funny incident this March. 6, maybe 7 Norwegians rented snowmobiles and a guide in Longyearbyen. Somehow nobody noticed how much they'd had to drink. They were already heading to the safety briefing by the snowmobiles when they were breath tested, and all of them were completely drunk. And basically, if even one of them had started a snowmobile, their licenses would have been taken away.
Murders, assaults, drunken riots. What actually happens here?
Drunken incidents do happen, but it's almost always visitors, not locals.
So guests could smash a window and steal stuff from your car?
In theory, yes. And in 2017, there was even a strange month when cars started disappearing. But of course, they didn't really disappear. They were just found parked somewhere random, nowhere near where they'd been left. Nobody ever figured it out. Maybe it was students on internships, maybe something else. After that, people started taking their car keys with them more often.
And if something serious happens, is there a Russian court here? Or is it handled by Norway?
Norway. There's no court here at all. The court is on the mainland.
Wait, so even if you're in Barentsburg?
Yes.
So let's say you get into a fight, break someone's nose, where are you tried?
On the mainland.
In Norway?
Yes.
So that means 2 Russian citizens who might not even have Norwegian visas.
Exactly.
You're basically taken by the Norwegians and tried in their courts. They'll even issue you a visa along the way. All right, let's take a look at a kindergarten in Norway. This is what a kindergarten in Longyearbyen looks like. First of all, there are several of them, quite a few. And just look at how Norwegians design kindergartens and schools. The most important thing, photography is prohibited. They deliberately made the kindergarten beautiful. It might actually be one of the nicest buildings in all of Longyearbyen. And then they banned photography. So yes, we're technically breaking the rules. This is what the kindergarten grounds look like. There's all kinds of equipment here. Swings, slides, little playhouses. There's a huge terrace with tables and boards. Apparently, when it's warm, some of the classes happen outdoors. There are also several covered shelters with large grills in the middle. Now let's head back to Barentsburg. This is the kindergarten in Barentsburg. The school and the kindergarten are in the same building. This is the only school and the only kindergarten in Barentsburg. It's dirty here. Everything's broken. It's hard to even tell what's going on. There's no real playground. I guess this is where the kids play. The contrast with Norway is pretty shocking. There is technically a slide. Remember the slide in Norway? Well, here's a Russian one. But hey, they do have fairy tale characters painted on the walls.
Up until 1998, people could actually give birth on Svalbard. But after 1998, for safety reasons, for both the mother and the baby, that was banned. Pregnant women now go to the mainland to give birth and then come back.
It's cold. 4 degrees. It's freezing.
Kesha is a local celebrity. Tourists love him. Officially, he's listed as an Arctic fox. Cats are banned here. Only dogs are allowed. But Keisha is the only cat the governor of Svalbard knows about. And she's fine with it, because on paper, he's a red Arctic fox.
So one day I walk into the veterinary service in Longyearbyen and say, "Could you give me some flea treatment for cats?" She just stares at me, eyes wide open. "What cats?" she says. "What cats are you talking about?" I say, "Well, hypothetically, I'm just asking whether you have it or not." And of course, I had to explain everything for a long time. I tried joking, winking a bit, but yeah, that awkward feeling lingered for the rest of the day.
So what if a cat from Barentsburg comes over here? Will they shoot it or something?
Hang it. No, of course not. That's not how it works. The governor's office is fully aware that there are cats in Barentsburg, and the same veterinarians regularly come over, including with vaccines for cats, which are officially written off as vaccines for Arctic foxes.
So the ones that are in the cages there, it's mainly puppies and a few retired dogs. They get retired between 8 and 10 years old, and they live up to 15, 16 years old. So quite often the retired dogs, as they're very social, they have seen a lot of people for the whole life, they lived almost in a pack. They get to be very nice family dogs. And it's a lot of locals in town that have a dog who is actually retired from one of the dog yards.
Barentsburg had never had sled dogs. There were no clear rules about importing or exporting them, no standards for keeping them, feeding them. Nothing was defined. So in April 2016, we brought in the first 2 dogs, privately owned dogs. We tested the entire system of care using them. Then in December 2016, the first 7 puppies arrived for commercial use. Naturally, they were Siberian Huskies and Samoyeds. That was the simplest and most accessible option. After that, we started bringing in other breeds as well. Now we have 65 dogs.
What happens if a dog dies?
As far as I know, I've talked to the veterinary service about this. The dogs are usually transported to the mainland, where they're later examined.
Today, of course, the main source of income on Svalbard for both the Russian and the Norwegian sides is tourism. People come here from all over the world to see the Arctic. Everything here is extremely expensive and visitors spend a lot of money. That's basically what keeps this place alive. But at the same time, both Norway and Russia continue mining coal here. The mines are everywhere, partly just to maintain a presence. And do the Norwegians actually make money mining coal? Because I've read that what the Russians mine, this Arctic coal, is more of a symbolic project, just to show activity, and most of that coal simply goes to heating Barentsburg itself.
It's not quite true that either the Norwegians or the Russian company, Arktikugol, mine coal purely for profit. Why do they mine it at all? Partly to supply the settlements. In Longyearbyen, about 50% of the coal they mine is used locally. In Barentsburg, it's around 30%. Everything else is sold. But overall, it's not really profitable and not very efficient. So why do it at all? Essentially, it's about complying with the Svalbard Treaty, which was signed back in 1920. This here is Mine 2B. It's a symbolic place for locals because according to local legends, Santa Claus lives there. And right beneath Mine 2B, there's a mailbox, where kids drop off their letters to Santa.
The mine, that's the one on the hillside?
Yes.
And in general, there are a lot of traditions here. For example, one very charming tradition over 100 years old is taking off your shoes when entering a building. It started with the miners who didn't want to bring coal dust indoors, so they took off their boots. And to this day, both on the Russian and the Norwegian sides, you're expected to remove your shoes when entering hotels, restaurants, and other public spaces. It's a bit inconvenient. Tourists wear fancy trekking boots that have to be unlaced, but the tradition is still very much alive.
There used to be exactly 24 steps here, each one numbered with paint. Why? Miners worked here on 2-year contracts. And at the end of every month, a miner would sit on the next step and take a photo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 years, 24 months. When he took the 24th photo, it was on the last step closest to the exit. I've completed my contract. I'm going home. We're now at what's called the garage station. Why a station? Back when many more people worked here. Today there are very few. Miners were transported to their workplaces by electric locomotive. Attached to it was a passenger car that could carry a certain number of people. Some workers went straight to their job sites, while others stayed here. In this glassed-in, well-lit space with benches and warmth. So it functioned as a waiting room. That's why people started calling it a station.
In 2006, a project appeared here, under the auspices of the United Nations, with a budget of $9 million US. What's the idea behind it? To preserve the seeds in case of a nuclear war, an asteroid impact, or some other global catastrophe, so that seed survives. What you're looking at is actually a former mine ventilation tunnel, just one of the old ventilation shafts. They went inside, set a constant temperature of minus 18 degrees Celsius, using the natural cold of being underground, and added refrigeration systems on top of that. Why Svalbard? Because of the permafrost. It was naturally cold and stable. Although in 2017, due to global warming, the ground around the facility thawed significantly, and the storage itself began to flood. So work here is still ongoing. Back in 2016 or 2017, in winter, you could drive right up to the entrance. That dome you see over there is another interesting structure. It's a local greenhouse. Benjamin Vidmar, an American, came here to experiment with Arctic farming. He collects leftover plant waste from restaurants, much of which he originally grew himself, and composts it to produce new tomatoes and fresh greens.
So basically, it's all compost?
Yes.
These big antennas behind me, they are called ACE-CUT, and it's a scientific research place. Here, these two, they are measuring the interaction between the solar activity, the solar eruptions, and the atmosphere on top of us. A small one, it's actually possible to steer it 180 degrees to check on various directions. It needs so much power that the first time they've been steering it, it blacked out the whole town.
Because Svalbard is so far north, it has about 120 days of polar night and 127 days of polar day every year. As you can see, right now it's polar day, and the time on the clock doesn't really matter. The light stays more or less the same all day long. You can wake up in the middle of the night, a plane arrives around 1:30 a.m. and it's just as bright as it is during the day. And there goes a slightly sad-looking woman in a hat at 1:30 in the morning.
She's heading to the airport, catching a flight.
She's going to the airport?
Yep.
Sleeping here is really uncomfortable because your body just doesn't understand that it's time to sleep. So you end up having to completely block out the windows with curtains. I've already mentioned how Svalbard draws tourists from across the globe. What I wanted to find out was whether Chinese visitors were part of that mix. Are there many Chinese visitors?
Yes, a lot.
And how are they perceived in St. Petersburg, for example? People don't really like Chinese tourists.
Unfortunately, Chinese aren't always very willing to follow environmental standards. In general, people behave quite chaotically. They don't speak English. And they don't really listen to their own translators either. So when Chinese tour groups arrive here, or anywhere really, it often turns into chaos.
Now let's talk about culture. This is the House of Culture in Barentsburg. By the way, it was recently renovated. And here's its counterpart in Longyearbyen. There's one small but important detail. Even at the edge of the world, Norwegians think about accessibility and people with disabilities. For example, at the entrance to the local culture center, there's a button. You press it and automatic door openers kick in, the doors open by themselves. And that's really great. Not just for people with disabilities, but also if you're coming in with a stroller. And the library here is just unreal. This is what the library in Barentsburg looks like. And this is the library in Longyearbyen. Feel the difference. You walk around and can't help but feel jealous. Spaces like this are seriously lacking in Russia. And once again, we're literally at the edge of the world. And yet everything here is beautifully designed, thoughtfully planned. People who live in small towns or villages, wouldn't you love to have a community center like this? A library like the one in Longyearbyen? Barentsburg is an incredibly depressing place. I honestly don't understand people who are genuinely excited to spend a whole week here. What is there to do in Barentsburg? The urban environment, if you can even call it that, looks extremely sad. All the roads are paved with concrete slabs. A lot of them have collapsed or fallen apart. Everything is covered in construction debris. Rusty radiators, cables, scraps of metal everywhere. In summer, it's especially depressing to look at. In winter, all of this is hidden under snow, but in summer, you see the full mess that's going on here. Our goal is communism. Yeah, maybe a better goal would be fixing the stairs. It's very bleak to live and work in Barentsburg, especially when you compare it to Longyearbyen. I wouldn't want to live like that. But somehow people still fall in love with the place. They go out into nature, hike the trails, explore the surroundings.
In 1997, a fire broke out at the mine in Pyramiden, and by 1998, the issue became very clear. There simply wasn't enough money to support two settlements anymore, both Barentsburg and Pyramiden. The choice was fairly obvious: either rebuild the mine here essentially from scratch after the fire, or focus resources on Barentsburg. Staying in Barentsburg was more logical, more economical, and more efficient. That's what they decided to do. Today, the number of visitors coming here, tourists specifically, is no smaller than in Barentsburg. Last year, the number of visitors to the two settlements was almost exactly the same. And the growth trend here is even stronger, because people are genuinely interested in coming to see the Soviet past, which has been preserved remarkably well in this place. We're entering the cafeteria building. Very often, visitors from Europe who don't read Russian think this is a cultural center, because of the posters, the cinema announcements, but that's not quite true. In Soviet times, the cafeteria, both in Barentsburg and in Pyramiden and all other social benefits, was free. It was an obvious daily gathering place. And that's how they knew what movie would be shown that evening. The posters just told you what you'd be watching later.
So the flowers have been standing here like this since the 1990s, right?
Yes.
Nothing has changed since the 90s.
Some things have changed. At first, almost all the buildings were visited in one way or another by people from Longyearbyen. I don't necessarily mean residents. Some arrived by yacht, some by plane, some by snowmobile. They explored the buildings. Sometimes people were sent from Barentsburg to pick up spare parts, and while they were there, they'd look around too. So for a long time the buildings were in pretty rough condition. Now there's a constant process of cleaning, restoring and putting things in order. And gradually everything is being brought back to a decent state.
What's this?
The keys to Paris.
So what is Paris?
Paris was the former women's dormitory. There were several dormitories here, for families with children, and for single men and women. The dormitory for single women was called Paris, and there's a legend about how that name came to be. Svetlana Svetlichnaya once came here to give interviews. In Soviet times, various artists, performers, and celebrities often visited Soviet settlements, holding creative evenings and meeting residents. And at some point, a woman in Pyramiden asked Svetlana, "Where did you get such a beautiful dress?" She replied, "From Paris." From that moment on, the women's dormitory became known as Paris, and the men's dormitory, as a counterbalance, was called London.
On the ground floor of the women's dormitory, Paris, there was a cafe called Prague. So, on their way from London to Paris, single men would stop by Prague to pick something up along the way.
It's worth noting that in the 1990s, after the Soviet Union had essentially collapsed, life in the settlement was a bit simpler. The population had decreased, so people no longer lived under such strict rules. They lived more in small clusters or plots. This made it easier for shift workers to live together and discuss work matters. That's why, for instance, men started living in Paris. Over time, everything became a bit more mixed.
Tell me, was there love here? In Pyramiden?
Of course, both in Pyramiden and in Barentsburg. There were weddings and children. See that brick building on the right? That's our hospital.
Was it a maternity hospital?
Exactly.
So they don't give birth here anymore, but back then they did?
Until 1998, giving birth here was allowed and happened regularly. This applied to Longyearbyen, Barentsburg, and Pyramiden alike. Some children came with their families.
But some were born locally.
Yes, some were giving birth here.
I imagine there must have been quite a few births here. It must have been kind of sad and boring.
Not exactly a lot, but it wasn't unusual either. It happened consistently.
So this was a dormitory?
I'll show you the most interesting part. It's really just 2 unique rooms. Everything else is standard. Although I once had some Swedish designers here, we spent 4 hours in this one building with them.
4 hours. And what did they do?
They went into every room and examined the wallpaper. They were preparing a new wallpaper catalog.
So eventually this might show up in IKEA?
Look at this.
I see.
Actually, this cabinet right here, it's a refrigerator. Back in Soviet times, because all meals in the cafeteria were free, people ate everything there. Homes didn't even have kitchens. Rooms weren't equipped for cooking at all. There were just small recesses in the walls that acted as refrigerators. Sometimes these were little removable boxes. The names of the residents are clearly marked here in order, and you can see how they were assigned to different plots they were working on. This building is essentially the central building of the settlement, the main office hub. It housed the entire administrative apparatus and the accounting department. And here we have that famous button, the one that moves mountains.
Oh, wow.
Let's modestly call it the apparatus for running the world. Interestingly, during Soviet times, the first apartments in both Barentsburg and Pyramiden were located here. On Pyramiden, it was on the 3rd floor in a rather secret room. I think everyone probably guessed where it was. But you wouldn't find it immediately.
Walking down such a long corridor with a man carrying a gun, it felt like we were going to a firing squad. There was just this guy in a leather coat and no one knew who he was. Oh, and this is what the untidy rooms looked like?
Exactly. This is what the village looked like when people first returned. It had windows, bars, shutters, and even a stove.
So they could defend themselves if needed?
The stove could also be used to quickly burn documents. We once found a folder dedicated to 1990s tourism. It was fascinating. It even had guest registration cards for foreigners staying at the hotel.
Oh, look at the fashion. Autumn, winter, 1995. Saki. Not interested in the leather jacket, are you?
And here we have Narnia.
The secret passage? What was here?
I think it was just an archive.
This was a mine?
There are 2 galleries, but it's not a mine shaft in the strict sense. On the right, we have the human incline. People would move up and down there.
Did they walk?
No, they rode in mine carts going up and down after their shifts. To the left was the coal incline, where the coal went down, along with some construction materials.
These buildings, they're the same as the ones in Barentsburg, the ones they later clad. Back then, they were just beautiful brick buildings.
Exactly. What's the cladding for? First of all, insulation. But beyond that, it makes the village look brighter. All northern settlements try to make themselves colorful because of the polar night.
Unfortunately, they forgot to invite someone who knows how to pick colors properly.
We're now heading into the school's kindergarten building.
This is the kindergarten?
Yes. Education here, as it was in Barentsburg, provided a full secondary school education. Classes were mixed, meaning there weren't teachers for every grade. There were essentially only 2 classrooms, one on the left, one on the right. The first floor, where we are now, was the school floor. The second floor was the kindergarten. They did minimal cleaning and tidying here. On the second floor, where the kindergarten was, back in 2016 I tried to recreate what it would have looked like in Soviet times. Using the objects found here, cribs, textbooks, lockers, notebooks, and so on, I created representative rooms, a bedroom, a playroom, a classroom, and an assembly hall.
Whose Svalbard is this? And look, Svalbard isn't even marked here. How is that possible? What kind of map is this without Svalbard? Sergey, really?
I think everyone had Svalbard in their minds. There's even a globe on the second floor. The kids must have pointed out Svalbard so often that the spot is simply worn away.
Someone got a 5. Are these some zombies beating fascists? A shark bit someone's leg off.
There's even a gym with Donald Trump.
Well, that's just...
No, we're just joking that even in Soviet times, they somehow knew who would be president. The second floor was the kindergarten. It's funny, we'll see a latch on the doors at the top, meant to keep the kids from opening them. During nap time or any other playful activity, they couldn't just run down to the first floor or wander around the village. This was the playroom. As you can see, the interesting part is that all the work found here has been collected. Homework from school children and kindergarteners. Everything was carefully filed by topic and content. And there's an entire shelf full of these works.
Such a dead village. And all you see are children's clothes, little clothes hanging on a chair.
It's actually really interesting here. If you're curious, there's an entire notebook with summer plans.
Plans. Let's take Monday as an example. Children come in, exercise, breakfast, a tour of the greenhouse, observing the plants growing there, juice, active games in the community center gym, lunch, preparing for bed, sleep, afternoon snack, paper crafts, other crafts, watching TV. I want to live like this. Playing on the computer. Where's the computer? Watching a series. Trade Union Corner. Labor has been and remains the greatest virtue and adornment of man.
It's worth taking a look at the wall and then slowly approaching it.
It will surprise you.
What is this? Beads?
No, it's not beads, it's cable insulation.
It was evening. We've had nothing to do.
A polar evening, as you can imagine.
Could you sit on the chairs? We're in the assembly hall.
Santa!
So, okay, I'm here. Come on. Hello, kids, girls and boys.
Will there be presents?
There will be presents if you've behaved well, but judging by your eyes, I see you've behaved badly, so Santa Claus brought you coal. Let's go work in the mine.
This is a reconstructed school classroom. All classrooms were originally on the first floor. It was just easier to arrange and tidy everything here.
Kids magazines. 1993. Look, in 93 they were scaring the kids with cops. Wanted, a red-haired boy, 17 years old. He has...
In 1995, children went back to the mainland in 1995.
This is the most beautiful trash container in Russia. No, seriously, this is an amazing thing.
The Cultural and Sports Complex. This was a place where all the miners, their wives, and children would gather. At that time, Longyearbyen only had barracks where people lived. They needed a space to come together and spend time. In Pyramiden, this was the Cultural and Sports Complex. People came here to play sports, participate in cultural events, and just relax.
The temperature is perfect for storing films. So many of them have been preserved in excellent condition. On the mainland, some of these films were lost or fell apart, so they've been preserved. It's like a doomsday vault, but for movies.
About some of the nuances, you may not know this, but jazz was essentially banned in the Soviet era. Yet here, jazz ensembles performed, which was actually encouraged. Both Pyramiden and Barentsburg were showcase settlements for the Soviet Union. They were created as model Soviet communities, so that the West could see how a Soviet citizen lived.
The key point, the pyramid, is this mountain.
The settlement is named after this mountain.
This one,
Yes,
which is now...
a little hidden from view, and this is Mount Reutershold.
This is Reutershold and this is the pyramid. Many visitors to Svalbard fall in love with the northern nature and keep coming back. Unfortunately, I can't fall in love with it. I've been to the north many times, the very north, the not so north, different islands. Northern nature is wonderful, amusing, but I just can't fall in love with it. I much prefer cities with skyscrapers, avenues, interesting architecture, and new neighborhoods. Well, friends, we've made our comparison. If you liked Longyearbyen more, give it a like. If you liked Barentsburg better, give it a like too. Like, leave comments, share the video, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye, everyone.